Hello everyone, my name is Roya and today I am coming to you with the books that I read in the first half of December. There are 10 books here, so I'm going to try to talk about them as quickly as I possibly can. So firstly, we have A Portrait in Shadow by Nicole Jarvis. This is a historical fantasy about Artemisia Gentileschi. This was really good. It does read like historical fiction more than historical fantasy though. So I really did enjoy it, but I felt like the fantasy aspect could have been a lot stronger. Basically, the magic system in this is that the paintings have magical qualities to them. They can heal the person that they're for, stuff like that. And I felt like that whole part was really kind of weak compared to the historical elements. But as a historical fantasy, as leaning on the historical part, I think it was really strong. It really did make a lot of good points, especially with regards to, you know, what Artemisia Gentileschi is largely known for, in that she was raped and that ruined her life, and yet everyone still blamed her and investigated her and said, oh, why did you ruin so-and-so's life, and how none of that is fair. And so I think it was a really enjoyable book. The Bloodless Princes by Charlotte Bond. This is the second book. This is the sequel to The Fireborn Blade. I really enjoyed this one a lot more than the first one. I think the weak point for me for the first one was the villain, because he was literally just a jerk, and literally just made me uncomfortable for no reason without actually having any substance to him. But he is not in this one, and our two main characters fall in love in this one, which is great, and the little dragon turns into a cat, and it's freaking adorable. And Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This I was not a fan of. I actually DNF'd it halfway through. Basically, this is about a futuristic-ish society where nobody dies of anything anymore. So old age and like anything else that can possibly kill someone just doesn't exist. If someone gets run over by a train, they just, you know, they still get better and all of that. So people called scythes have to go around and essentially simulate how many people of what kind of demographic and what ages, etc., would normally have died anyway. So they go around just killing whoever. Like, for example, they go into a plane and they say, okay, everyone in this plane, you know, since there are no plane crashes anymore, everyone in this plane dies, sorry. And so I thought that just kind of made absolutely no sense. Like, what is the point of a society where nobody dies anymore? Why do people still have to die? Like, all they're doing is just simulating how many people would normally have died. And I felt like it was kind of unfair too, because, for instance, someone dies just because they rescue animals. So it's kind of like, oh, well, people who rescue animals like sometimes die trying to rescue animals, so we're just gonna kill you. And it's kind of like, really? Like, why not kill people? You know, I thought going into this book that, oh, maybe they're killing people like before they can commit a crime or something like that. But no, like, that wasn't it at all. They're literally just killing people who would, you know, to kind of simulate who would have died regardless, you know, if death were still a thing, which makes absolutely no sense. And our story follows two characters who basically get, against their will, sort of apprenticed to be scythes. And so they have to go around kind of learning the art of, you know, finding the people who have to be killed, etc., etc. And it was really boring. Basically, we get no actual character depth at all. The characters are really bland. It was really boring following everything that they were doing. A lot of the chapters where they are killing people off is from the point of view of those people, and we don't have any background on those people. We don't care about them, so there's no substance to having that be from their point of view. It doesn't make any sense. And so this entire book was just so painfully boring. I just could not read anymore. Fire Dance by Del Jacobs. This is a romance book that really, truly had no business being a romance book. It was really sexist the entire way through, and I don't just mean like the time period had some sexist elements to it. I mean this actual book, the narrative itself is sexist. And then it does get like really religious, and not in just a kind of like the characters are religious kind of way. It gets into like how the main character's father, who is the villain of this story, is like a Satanist and sold his soul to Satan and blah blah blah. And it just like it was just so weird, and it made no sense. And the storytelling in this was an absolute mess. And then additionally, I'm just not a fan of stories where, you know, romance books where the two main characters have to get married or something like that. It just doesn't do it for me. I just don't feel like that's a romance book. If they like hate each other and they are stuck together, it just doesn't make sense. And so when they fall in love finally, it comes with such a like, you know, they hated each other, so it's so unsatisfying seeing them fall in love. So this whole thing was just a hot mess, and I didn't enjoy it at all. The Weavers of Alamaxa by Hadir Elsbai. This is the sequel to The Daughters of Izdihar, which was my favorite read of the year, and I loved this one almost as much. This follows the main characters after the events of the first book that leaves off on a total cliffhanger. The first book focused a lot on the women's rights issues and really highlighted a lot of what goes on in women's daily lives, even just the little, tiny, seemingly insignificant ways in which they're underestimated and belittled and so on and so forth. This one has largely solved those problems, but it shows that like oppression still continues, and basically it's trying to erase the elemental abilities that people in this book generally have. And it does kind of parallel the whole conservative, like, we need to fix this person when it's not any of anyone's business what this person is doing. And so on. So it was really good in that way. I didn't think it was quite as good as the first one, but I still loved it and still gave it 5 stars. Cats of the World by Hannah Shaw and Andrew Martilla. This is an amazing book written by two people who basically went to all these different countries and photographed cats and talked to locals about what goes on with cat rescue and how cats live in those different places. And it is really eye-opening, coming from an American's perspective, like how cats, you know, maybe in some of these countries, cats don't get adopted by just families very much, so they just have a better life being just fed by a community of people and cared for by a community of people. There are several countries presented in this book where shop cats are pretty normal, even if it's like a grocery store and such. And like there are photographs in here of cats laying on lettuce and like nobody cares because people actually think that that's a sign of cleanliness. When you have a cat there, you know that like, oh, this store must not have, you know, rats and such. So, you know, a cat is actually a really good sign, which I think is so cool. I really think that we should bring that all over the world. That would be really great if we had more like shop cats and such here, if that were just normal. The fact that these people actually went to these places, this is from their own, like, not just research, but actually having gone there, talked to people, gotten involved with everything that's going on, seen it firsthand for the most part, all of that. So it's not just an info dump, it's actually like telling the story of this is what we actually went there and found. And it's so fascinating that way, not to mention the photos are great. Surrounded by Idiots. This was my works book club pick this month. This is basically another book that goes into different personality types, but this is so weirdly specific. Like they really get into like basically there are 4 different personality types that everyone pretty much fits into, and they are really, really specific. And it's actually kind of weird thinking that like one person almost can't be a mix of two different ones. Like they are this, no matter how specific the thing is. And I definitely noticed that reading it. I definitely saw myself in one of those types very clearly, and people I know, and like my husband and my friends and everybody in other very specific ones of these. And it's just so interesting and weird thinking about it. So basically it's with the point of, we're all, there are four different types of people out there in this regard. So you might think someone's just an idiot, like stupid for not getting that or for thinking something else, etc., etc. But it's actually having to do with what their own way of processing something is. Two Twisted Crowns. This is the sequel to One Dark Window. I mean, this is basically a gothic fantasy horror-ish type of thing. I'm not going to go too far into what it's about because it is a sequel, but basically I didn't enjoy this one as much as the first one because our main character is possessed for most of this book. So most of it is like not from her point of view or anything, and instead we get a lot of side characters instead, and it was just like not as interesting, but there were good parts in it. Pick the Lock by A.S. King. This is about basically, it's so hard to describe what the setting of this is because I'm still not even really sure. It's basically like modern day only, and there was a pandemic. It is inspired by there being a pandemic, but it is not the same one that we had. But basically the main character's father uses the pandemic to further his abuse of his whole family, basically, and it's just so bizarre. I'm not entirely sure what this book was trying to do. At least it was more clear than A.S. King's last book. She's been definitely writing some very strange books lately, but this one at least had more, you could tell what things were trying to represent in it. So essentially, the father in this story imprisons the mother in a system of tubes, like a freaking hamster cage, basically. So she just like can't leave, even though she is the one who works to support their family as a very successful touring musician. So she's allowed to like go out on tour, but then every time she comes home, she can't leave the house. She has to stay in her little tube thing. And it's just so strange. It just makes absolutely no sense. But it does kind of make sense because it's kind of trying to show, when you question yourself about why someone doesn't leave an abusive relationship and how that's not really the question you should be asking. So it does kind of make sense in that regard, but it's so literal and so odd. And with regards to the pandemic and the stuff that it causes in this, it's so completely different from what we experienced during our pandemic. And the timeline is very different on it as well. And there were times where I was kind of confused about what was going on, and then there were also some parts where the main character is writing something, and at first it's not clear whether that actually happened or whether that's in her head, before you start realizing that it's in her head and all of that. And so it's just really odd and it makes no sense, but there were definitely some really good parts in it, and it was really unputdownable at parts, and so I really liked it, but it was just a little odd and I kind of thought that it could have been better. And finally, Somewhere in the Deep. This is a young adult fantasy, basically about a girl who fights creatures for money, and then she loses one day when she had never lost before, and she has to go on this adventure to do all this stuff. And a lot of this book really just didn't make any sense. I felt like it was really bland. It had seemingly no moral to the story or any kind of character depth, and any character interactions that happen are just like really cringy, and I just did not understand what this book was trying to do, or what I just didn't find it very gripping or interesting. It had some actiony parts, but not a lot of conflict, if that makes sense. So overall, an interesting idea. The setting was pretty unique, but overall, I didn't enjoy this book that much. So anyway, those are the books that I read in the first half of December. Let me know if you've read any of these and have any thoughts on them, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!